In the last week, I've been asked some very similar questions about Splatoon 2's movement techniques by at least 4 different people. And thinking about it, there's still not a lot of content about this on YouTube right now. I think this is one of the most crucial concepts to understand in Splatoon, and even though I addressed it indirectly in the How to Get Out of Ranked series where I talk about walk and shoot syndrome, I still haven't actually done a video about the mechanics behind it, so here's the rundown. In Splatoon, we use the term strafing very loosely. By the definition you'd see in most shooters, I'm strafing just by walking and shooting like this. But in Splatoon, we use the term to mean canceling your momentum while swimming. Normally, while you're swimming, if you input a different direction, it takes some time for your character to change directions and accelerate. You see it most when you're trying to swim tightly around corners, so if I try and stick to this corner, you'll see from the track that you can see in the ink that I actually swung pretty wide around the corner before I came around, or when you're trying to turn 180 degrees like this. This makes a lot of physical sense, but like movement in many video games, we can exploit the way game mechanics work to break physics and go faster. There are a few different actions your character can take while swimming that immediately cancel all your momentum and stop you instantly as soon as you initiate them. This sort of violates the laws of thermodynamics and may bring about the heat death of the Inkling universe more rapidly, but squid go zoom, and that's what's important here. The types of strafing are differentiated by which action you're using to stop your swim momentum. They're called Sub-Strafing, and either Main-Strafing or Shot-Strafing. Sub-Strafing is the first one we'll talk about. To Sub-Strafe, you swim, cancel that swim by pressing and holding R, which puts you into the animation for aiming a sub-weapon, and then you press and hold ZL and swim in a different direction. So very slowly, it looks like this. And more quickly, it looks like this. If you find that you're throwing the sub-weapon by mistake, what's happening is you're releasing R before you get the ZL button down. So make sure to hold R longer and only release it once you're swimming already, and then that should stop happening. Throwing a sub-weapon by mistake while you're sub-strafing is a really common issue, and it can be a problem because it can cause you to run out of ink in the middle of an engagement. So it's worth practicing to make sure that this doesn't happen and you still have the ability to fire shots or paint your feet after you've done this strafing technique. Sub-strafing is possible with every weapon in the game. So even with ink mines, which don't really aim because they're always getting placed directly at your feet, they're only going to get installed in the ground when you release the button. When you press the button down and hold it, you still get this about to throw a sub animation that you get with all of the other bombs that you can aim. And so that animation there will still enable you to sub-strafe. Now, this wasn't always the case with ink mines, but it was patched into the game to make them more viable. So it would appear that the developers of the game are aware of strafing techniques and approve of their use. We'll see if this technique, sub-strafing, returns for Splatoon 3, or if maybe they're trying to position the dash move as a replacement to try and keep the game fast while removing the physics exploit. Post your theories on whether it'll be back in chat, because I'm nervous and I could use the reassurance. Anyway, sub-strafing is the fastest way to change direction in terms of frame data, but if all you're doing is sub-strafing, you're just moving around faster. You can't just spend all of your time dodging shots in a 1v1. Eventually, you're going to need to be returning fire. Enter Main-Strafing or Shot-Strafing. Many weapons in Splatoon fire fast enough that you can use a shot to cancel your swim momentum, and that's almost as fast as using the sub-weapon throwing animation. If you're in a 1v1, you can still use sub-strafing to dodge bombs and retreat, but you're not going to do damage with it. Shot-strafing, on the other hand, lets you change directions and fire at the same time. Optimal combat movement with a shooter weapon that's shot-strafing is to fire at your opponent until you either miss a shot or your opponent starts getting their aim on and start to hit you. And then you shot-strafe in a direction that'll mess their aim up and start firing again from a short distance away. I do really mean fire at your opponent until you miss a shot. The way it's been explained to me, credit to Brock.com here, at top level, a player you're shooting at will get hit by your first shot and then have their aim on you by the time you're firing your second shot. That's how fast top players are. If you're using the same weapon as them and you miss even a single shot, that gives them the potential to splat you before you splat them. So if you miss, you need to move and throw their aim off again. You know where you're going to move before they do, so you can adjust your aim preemptively while they have to spend extra time reacting to where you're going to move. It's the same principle that most dualies take advantage of when they dodge roll. They're compensating for where they're about to move so that when they get there, their aim is already on and they're hitting shots before their opponent is. Should you always re-engage and keep firing at them? No, especially once you get up to higher levels of play. Self-preservation is often worth more than risking getting splatted to go for a pick of your own. If you're already damaged before the fight starts, your opponent and you are trading shots back and forth, and that'll go in your opponent's favor, even if you hit the first shot. But if you are committing to the fight and you're in range to be hitting shots, shot-strafing is probably the way to go for a shooter class weapon. One alternative to shot-strafing is jumping and shooting. This isn't a kind of strafing, but while we're talking about combat movement, it's a good idea to go over all the same. The technique has two significant advantages and several important disadvantages. So, where main-strafing is a shooter player's bread and butter option, jumping and shooting is situational for most weapons. One advantage of jumping is that given a 1v1 in a flat area, it changes your opponent's aiming task from being one-dimensional, where you only have to worry about something that's on this left-right line, to being two-dimensional. Now you have to worry not only about where they are left and right, but you also have to worry about where they are up or down. The practice dummies in this room over here don't go up and down. There's no way to actually practice as if your opponents were jumping, and so it's harder for players oftentimes to account for people who are jumping just because they don't have drills they can do to get better at that. The initial disruption to your opponent's aim is going to be bigger than if you were just going to stay on the ground and main strafe back and forth. Another advantage of jumping is that it doesn't require your feet to be painted to perform the technique. In a situation where you're very badly cornered and out of position, this might be the only real way that you can move far enough to throw your opponent's aim off and try to squeak out a trade. Main strafing, as you can see, isn't going to move you as far as jumping if the area beneath you isn't painted your color yet. The disadvantages are pretty considerable, though. In most cases, jumping decreases the accuracy of your main weapon. So you can actually see this if you look at the 4 little handles around the circle, the 4 little lines. Right now, they're this distance away, but when I jump, you can see them jumping way out. That is indicating that the accuracy of my main weapon is getting worse because the shot spread is going to be worse. From here, they're mostly in a straight line, but you can see that there's a big jump where they can fire out much more randomly if I'm jumping here. Most blasters basically never want to make jump shots because the risk of your one shot just randomly going askew at an important moment isn't worth jumping for. This is part of what makes the Dually Squelcher's jump tech so crazy. It's that you can jump and still maintain that perfect dodge roll accuracy for a while. Also, while jumping does throw people's aim off well at first, it actually makes your trajectory more predictable at the end of it. You can't change directions quickly in the air, like you can with main strafing on the ground. The disruption to their aim is bigger at first, but once an experienced player realizes you've jumped, they'll be able to project where you're landing, and as soon as they have a chance to correct their aim, they'll reliably be able to hit you as you fall to the ground. One of the worst things you can do against an aim-intensive weapon like a charger is jump down from a high place, because at that point, hitting you is as easy as hitting the moving targets in the training room. You're on that basically one-dimensional path, where all they have to do is adjust in one direction. And a charger who has gotten good at their weapon is going to be really good at hitting these moving targets with their shots. Jumping also can put you at risk because it puts you above cover that might have been keeping you safe from enemy fire before. Little openings like that are sometimes all something like a charger player needs to one-shot you. The rule I follow is that it's worth it to jump and shoot if you're sure you'll splat them by the time you reach the ground, or you don't have time to paint your feet to escape. Otherwise, keep access to your ground movement and just try and paint your feet and get out of the situation. Like we've alluded to, in a real fight, your opponent may well paint your feet when they start hitting you. So in addition to just practicing zipping around a fully painted training room, which isn't going to really represent the way that a fight will take place in an actual game, also practice painting your feet to get the fastest movement you can on unpainted ground, so that you can work on getting yourself out of tricky situations in positions where, you know, you might be tempted to try and jump and shoot. I find that it's actually really helpful to practice this in Salmon Run. You'll get to a point in that mode where you really just can't keep everything your color, and you're going to have to maneuver through enemy ink to get the job done. You may need to practice making sure that you don't mess your camera up as well. You know how sometimes when you move your cursor, your mouse cursor, too far off the screen, it'll make it so that its new neutral position, its new center position is different than what it was? Same thing can happen with your Splatoon reticle. If I aim down right now and keep aiming down past the point where the game actually lets me continue to rotate, when I move back up to my neutral hand position where I was holding it before, it'll actually move my aim way up. And I'll have to reset it by pressing the Y button. So what you want to do is practice aiming down far enough to paint your feet, but not so far down that it's going to change your neutral position. You can see now I'm back at my neutral hand position and I'm still aiming straight in front of me like I want to be. The biggest disadvantage of shot-strafing is just that not every weapon can do it as quickly. It's amazing on an end zap, but if you're trying to main strafe with a heavier weapon or a weapon that takes longer to fire, like something like the dynamo, it's just going to be completely ineffective. You're better off literally just turning around and swimming the other way than you are trying to use the dynamo to main strafe. Weapons like buckets and rollers are locked in place for a pretty long time while their attack animations come out, so main strafing just isn't going to be as worthwhile for them. With these two weapons, buckets and rollers, they're more likely to jump and shoot because they don't lose accuracy while they're jumping, and this way they can at least stay in motion from the jump while they're firing. They're not going to have to stand still while they go through this animation. They can at least be moving through the air a little bit while they're firing, and that's going to be a better movement option for them in combat. Splatlings that are currently firing will lose their entire charge as soon as they strafe left or right, and so it's usually not as effective to be main strafing with them. You can't do the sorts of things that you were doing with the end zap in combat with the splatlings. One sort of exception is the Nautilus. The Nautilus will still lose its charge and have to recharge as it comes up on the other side. But one thing it can do is, once you have a full charge, you can swim and then pop up and shoot. You can also charge up pretty quickly with this in the mini, so even if you do have to kind of main strafe over, it doesn't take a very long time to get a lethal amount of shots. And so if you have to main strafe, you can still act pretty effectively. You can still probably get a pretty decent time to splat that's worth using if you're going to be strafing back and forth like this. If a charger's close enough to an opposing player to have to strafe away in the first place, they've probably messed up. They're also not going to do it very quickly, even with their tap shots, so this isn't really a technique that you're going to get a lot of use of out of this weapon. And you're still going to do it much, much faster using Sub-Strafing. Really, it is mostly just the shooter weapons that are going to want to use this technique in combat. But oddly enough, main strafing is actually pretty useful for the very slowest weapon in the entire game, the Rainmaker. The Rainmaker doesn't have the ability to use sub-weapons at all, so Sub-Strafing isn't even an option for them to try. But what they can do is start charging a shot to cancel their swim momentum, just the way that you would Shot-Strafe or Sub-Strafe. And you're able to change directions quickly enough that maybe that helps you dodge a bomb or run away from a situation that would have been unsafe. Aiming clams is also an animation that cancels swim momentum. Is it useful? Honestly, I can't really think of a reason to use it over any other option, but it's kind of neat, I guess. If you'd like one-on-one coaching with me, find me on the Bravous Community Discord server, link in the description, and DM me about it. We'll record the session on our Twitch stream, Squid School, which airs Tuesdays from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Arizona time. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can be best friends forever and ever.